I will be reading Genesis 12, 1 through 9. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot's brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negev.
Looks like I've set aside my remote somewhere. I hope it turns up for me here soon. Otherwise, I'm going to have someone changing those slides for me. If you go right ahead, and as we go along. Can you recall learning to ride a bike yourself? Did you have training wheels? Were you blessed with that? Did you fall from time to time while you were riding your bike? Do you remember learning to drive a car? Who was it that was brave enough to sit in the passenger side with you? Was it simply a driver's ed teacher, or was there a mom or a dad? It's required now. There's a certain number of hours that you are required to have mom or dad driving with you. Maybe that's where all the gray hairs come from. Do you remember going off to college? Your first day? Did you have a car? Did you drive yourself? Did someone take you? Did you carpool? What do all of those situations have in common? Well, they are stages in life, certainly, mobility implied, but also they are life-changing events, whether you realize it or not. To learn, one must not only be willing, but one must practice. Would you agree with that statement? If you really want to become proficient at something, it requires action on your part. You're going to have to get on that bike. You're going to have to get behind the wheel. You're going to have to make the decision to leave the nest. You not only have to have action, though, you also have to stay with it. I mean, how many started an endeavor only to quit? And you are never going to become proficient at something like that. Men, do you remember the first time that you picked up a chainsaw or a weed eater and you tried to keep that thing going through the project that you had in front of you? Now, have you become better at knowing that you've got to sharpen the chain on that chainsaw, that you have to add oil to that gas in order for it to go? You actually have to put oil on the chainsaw, on the chain itself, in order to keep it lubricated. All of those things, maybe now you have become proficient at it, right? Because you've gone through years. Ladies, whenever you picked up a hobby, perhaps like crocheting or knitting or something of that nature, quilting, were those first projects as good as what they look now, or have you become better at such things? Spiritually speaking, I must be on the go and on the grow. Those lessons that we learn through life and developing skills applies to us spiritually, and we see in this man, Abram, he's not Abraham yet, and I'm going to make that mistake as we go through this lesson. And in every case, in the chapters that we're looking at this morning, from Genesis chapter 12 through 16, Abram is referred to as Abram and not Abraham, and Sarah is Sarai. Abram means exalted father. Sarai means princess. In this case, as we pick up the life of Abram, have you noticed that he's not perfect? I mean, have you noticed that he makes some mistakes? Does that bother you? I mean, right here in chapter 12, whenever we have the call of Abraham or the commission that had read for us, but in the second half of that chapter, he lies about Sarai being his wife to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And so what we want to look at and notice as we look at these chapters 12 through 16 is that Abram is on the go and he is on the grow, but he is not perfect. And I hope as we look at these examples of how God deals with Abram and Sarai, that we will take comfort in the knowledge that it is a growth process. The first time you rode a bike without training wheels, was that a wobbly event? I hope you still don't ride a bike like that. If you are a bike rider, I hope that you have gotten to the point where you can feel comfortable with it. But as we go through what we are seeing about Abram and his spiritual walk with God, that we understand is that he is immature on the outset, and he grows through the revelation of what God gives to us. But all points along the way, he is in a relationship with God. Okay? Spiritually, I must not only be on the go, I must be on the grow. Were you ever in the military? What was that boot camp experience like? Whenever you were away from home for the first extended period of time, what was it like to be deployed, to go overseas, to be in a foreign country, to be stationed somewhere without friends or family other than your military mates? Not unlike completely that commitment that you made whenever you first got married. Were you a little bit apprehensive about getting married? Did you begin to have second thoughts as the day approached? Did you wonder what you were getting yourself into? In order for one to become proficient, one must be committed. In order for one to be developing, they must also be dedicated. Abraham received God's call, and God said to him on the outset that it's going to cost you. And listen to these three things that Abram had to leave behind, and think of yourself as you went off to the military. Think of yourself as you maybe left for college. Think of yourself as you got married. I want you to leave your country. I want you to leave your relatives. I want you to leave your father's house. Now, each one of those is a degree of separation. To leave one's country is to leave one's culture, possibly one's identity. You ever been a foreigner? You ever been in a place where the language that they speak is a foreign language? Leave your identity, leave your culture, possibly leave your security, leave your nationalism. Now, we are patriotic as Americans, but what has God just said to Abram? I want you to leave your country. And he's not talking about someone going into the military and serving in a foreign field. He's actually talking about all that surrounds you and gives you security. I want you to forfeit. And then he says, I want you to leave your relatives. Now, this is his extended family. These are his aunts and uncles, his grandparents. I want you to walk away from all that has been your life. Now, you think about the support that you receive from your grandparents, from your aunts and uncles, and for some of us, it's pretty astounding. I've shared with you, my Papa Sikes comes from a family of 12. My dad is from a family of 13. My mom from a family of 6. I have over 19 aunts and uncles, sets of them, and then I also have over 100 cousins. I mean, to be without that extended family, that would be a sacrifice, wouldn't it? Then God says, leave your country, leave your relatives. I want you to even leave your father's house. Wow, that's my immediate family, Abram would say. That's my mother, that's my father, possibly my brothers and my sisters. Certainly that's my immediate kin. Now, Abram doesn't go alone. He does take Sarai, and he does take his nephew Lot and their possessions and servants, and so they're not destitute. But as he walks away, he is saying, if you leave your father's house, if you leave your country, if you leave your relatives, you leave your inheritance. You leave your future, well, at least of what you thought it to be or what it would have been. You are walking away from life as you know it. Now, the reason that I go through all of that and belabor it a little bit more than what I needed to is to show you the faith of Abraham. The fact that he listens to this first command, and in the verse 4 says, Abram went forth. That's what it says. He went forth, shows that this man is a man of faith. Now, what we read and what we're going to discuss is that he is not the greatest man of faith at this point in his life. He does have some things that he needs to overcome, though he does leave it behind. He doesn't leave it all behind because he does still have controlling him the culture and customs of the time, and we'll get into that, what I mean by that in just a moment. But he is one, imagine this, at the age of 75 who walks away because God told him to. Could you do that? Could I do that? Leave my country, leave my kinsmen, leave my father's house because God promises he is going to take me somewhere that I've never been before, I've never seen, and I'm not even positive what this location is even. God said simply to Abram, kind of like that old Disney movie, Follow Me, Boys. Do you remember that one? With Fred McMurray. I think old Kurt Russell was a young man within that time. Follow me, boys. And Abram's right along the way. Now, God made Abram some promises. We're going to capitalize on those promises in next week's lesson because we're going to be talking about Abram as Father Abraham and what it meant for God to develop him. But what we have basically within this section, chapters 12 through 16, they're very detailed, but they cover simply a time of 11 years of Abram's life. And it's this transition period from becoming a believer to becoming the father of the faithful. And it's a time period when God is tilling the soil and he's planting the seed and he is laying the fertilizer down and he is watering and he's expecting some fruit. But it isn't there yet because Abram is still an infant in his relationship with God. But he does, don't get me wrong, he does have a relationship with God. Now, what we are going to see as we go through these things is certainly the plan that God has, that he will gradually let Abram in on, the providential care that God practices in delivering Abram seemingly into what he got himself into, but nonetheless God is there, and the purpose that God reveals for Abram. He gets into part of that as we conclude and tells him the timetable, the promises that are going to be delivered, at least part of them, the ones that are not going to be so far-fetched, the ones that are a little bit more immediate. And even those, though, even the ones that are closer to are 400 years away. Now, why didn't God tell Abram that on the outset? I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless those that bless you. I'm going to curse those that curse you. And all nations are going to be blessed by you. But by the way, Abram, 400 years before your descendants get into the land is what he says in Genesis chapter 15. And 2,000 years before the Messiah comes. Might that have been a little bit discouraging? Might Abram in his infancy step back and say, now, wait a minute, that's long-term planning. You know, that's way past my retirement. That's way past my life. I'm not sure I'm ready to buy into this. Leave my country, leave my relatives, leave my father's house for those kind of long-range promises. But God waits to reveal to Abram. Parents, do you do that sometimes with your kids? Do you have mental checkpoints of the things that you need to talk to them about, and then you wait for the right moment, you wait for the conditions to be right, for them to develop, and still those times come a little bit sooner than what you expected them to? Well, imagine God as a father talking to Abraham as a child. And you say, well, yeah, but he is 75 years old. He is, but spiritually speaking, he is just a babe. And God develops, along with the activities that Abraham goes through, God develops his faith. Initially, though, to the point, to leave, one must leave. To leave the comforts of the ground, to put both feet upon the pedal, To leave, one must believe that I can ride. To get behind the wheel, to leave my parents' home and to go off to college, I must believe in a higher education. To leave, one must believe. To put on the uniform, to be deployed, whether it be by ship, plane, tank, or half-track. In order for me to do that, I must believe in that which I have been commissioned to do. Abram, in leaving Ur of the Chaldees, the land and the city of Haran, going down into Canaan, and then I had Leo purposely read a little bit further. And what are the first two things that we have recorded of Abram doing as soon as he enters into the land of Canaan, besides walking the breadth of the land? He built 2 altars. Abram left because he believed in what God had him to do. But then a famine comes in, and what we find in the second part of chapter 12 is as that famine hits, he has to leave the land that God has sent him to and go down into Egypt. How close of a relationship, and we're just going to go through this pretty quickly, how close of a relationship does Abram have with God? How much does he believe within his providential care? Well, he turns to his wife Sarai and he says, we're going to make this agreement. You are going to say, no matter where we are, that you are my sister. We might think, well, that's an odd request for a man to make of his wife. But what Abram knows that we might miss is that Sarai is a knockout. Sarai is a beautiful woman, and she is going to be desired by every ruler, every man that they come into contact with. And if she is not available, well, there is a simple solution. If she has a husband and you would like to take her as your wife, you just kill her husband, and then she is free to remarry. Now, we might think of heathens and actually having morals and ethics, and why would they even bother that this woman was married? But they do. And so as they go down to Egypt, Abram turns to Sarai and says, tell them you're my sister. And sure enough, Pharaoh takes her into his palace and makes her his wife, and God intervenes. In fact, God seems to bless Abram through this course of deception, through this deceit that he has manifested, because in Abram's mind, why would God care to rescue him? God did deliver him. It is God's hand that gets him out of Egypt, not just with their lives, but better off whenever they went. But the very fact that Abram asks Sarai to lie says Abram's not quite sure that God can deliver. I believe, Lord, help me in my unbelief. And at that point, we might have thrown up our hands. At that point, we might have said, well, Abram's a lost cause. Here I've led him from Ur of Chaldees to Haran. I've got him to the land of Canaan. And the first time there is a sign that he is going to have to suffer for my name's sake, he reneges. And yet what does God do? He blesses him. He delivers him. He returns him to the land of Canaan, free from possibly the evil clutches of Pharaoh of Egypt. And in the process, Abram grows. And as he comes back to the land of Canaan, we have this incident in chapter 13 where Abram is not certain about his relationship with his nephew. Their herdsmen are fighting against one another, and Abram says, Lot, we have got to separate. And Lot chooses the better land. He chooses the fertile land. He chooses the land that you would think would be the place that is well watered, where the flocks and herds could be pastured, that Abraham would choose for himself. And yet, Abram has a heart of compassion. And it says at this point that God takes Abram and he says, I want you to look to the north, I want you to look to the south, I want you to look to the east, and I want you to look to the west. Everything that you see is going to be your descendants. And in fact, your descendants are going to be like the dust of the earth. What is God doing? It sounds an awful lot like a pep talk to me, doesn't it to you? He is renewing the covenant with Abraham, because I believe Abraham is at a point in his life where he is wondering, I've just given the best of the land to my nephew. Is it really going to be mine? Am I really going to have it for my descendants? He is my nephew. He's not my son. And yet God reaffirms. And in the process, I believe what next happens, he enables. He reaffirms his covenant with Abraham, and he enables Abraham to trust more in the Lord. Because the next time push comes to shove, 5 kings joined with Chedorlaomer invade the land. Lot is carried away, and Abram doesn't run for the hills this time. He gathers a fighting army. He makes alliances with the people of the land of Canaan to fight alongside of him, and together they lead an army to rescue Lot. Do you see a little bit different man here? What's happening to Abram? Well, he has always been on the go, but he's also on the grow. He has developed into a warrior of righteousness. I don't believe that it's happenstance that God records this particular incident for us. Though we might think of it as a man simply exercising his muscles, I believe Abraham is exercising his domain. This will someday be the land that will be inherited by his children, and he's not going to put up with this kind of behavior. And God then introduces, at the conclusion of this particular battle, as he returns in victory with the spoils of war, he introduces a man who has shades of Christ. Do you remember it? His name is a long one. He introduces Melchizedek, without father, without mother, priest of the Most High God, king of Salem, which will become Jerusalem, prophesying to Abram. Prophet, priest, and king of Jerusalem. Does any of that sound familiar to you? The Hebrew writer says that it ought to. And in fact, the Hebrew writer implies that this could actually be Christ. I'm not going to hold you to that. But what is God doing? After Abram proves himself as a warrior of righteousness, God introduces to him, and Abram pays tithes to the figure of God on earth, the high priest. I talk about boosting one's morale. He turns to the king of Sodom. The king of Sodom was one of the victims in all of this. And he says, take what you want. I'm just so glad you brought back to me all of my goods and my family. I'll just take my family. You can have the rest. And Abram turns back to the king of Sodom and he says, I will not even take a shoestring from you, buddy, lest you say that it was you that made me rich. In other words, I walk in the glory of God and in the might of Jehovah. Now, where was that attitude whenever Pharaoh was sending him away with all of those possessions? Well, he's grown. Right? He's developed. God is complimenting him, and God has even given him power and strength and blessed him not simply with wealth, but an army of servants, and God approves. And Abram worships God in the form of Melchizedek. So are we there? Have we reached maturity? Is Abraham fully a man of God? Oh, no, because now he's got to question God. Maybe he's a little bit emboldened. He turns to God and he asks God, he says, God, you promised that I would be a blessing to all nations and that all nations would be blessed through me, and I don't even have a child yet. And he says, God, I've got an idea for you. I'm afraid that without a child, Eliezer, my servant, is going to be my heir. And is this the way it's going to plan out? I didn't exactly have it planned this way, but Lord, I understand if that's the way it has to be. Now, he has left he has left Haran, he has left his culture, his country, his custom. He has left his relatives. He has left his father's house. And by the way, that also means that he has left his father's religion, because Joshua tells us in Joshua chapter 24, verses 2 and 3, that Terah, Abram's father, worshiped other gods. I do have that one if you'll skip ahead to me. We're a little bit behind. And so this isn't something new for Abram to worship. To worship a God that talked to him. This is not something like a hand-me-down religion. And so he says, though I really don't have this in mind, is this the way it's going to be? Because Abram had left all of those things, but he still had the custom and the culture with him. In fact, the Newsy tablets were discovered in the area of Haran, and they have discovered by reading these Newsy tablets, which is basically an outline of family law and how inheritances were going to be passed down in antiquity. In the Newsy laws, if you don't have a child, your servant becomes your heir. A childless couple leaves everything to their chief servant. That's where Abraham got it. And what God says back to Abram is, no, Eliezer will not be the heir to your promise. And in fact, I promise you this, your heir will come from you. You will have a son. Now, if God was just a little bit more specific about that, then the next doubt that comes into play might not have happened. If he would have just said, your heir will come through you and Sarai, he just said that your heir will come through your loins. And so they are waiting. He started out at 75. He is now 85 years old, and Sarai is getting a little anxious. She knows that the way of women is no longer hers. In other words, she has passed the time of childbearing within her own mind. It just can't happen anymore. And she turns to Abram and she says, I want you to take Hagar, and I want her to become like your wife. We'll call her your concubine, and I want you to have a child with her so that you can have an heir. Abram, no problem. Abram doesn't go to God and say, God, did you hear this plan? God, is this okay? In Abram's mind, here is another solution, and guess where it comes from? The customs of the time. Once again, those Newsy tablets reveal that if you don't have a child, your wife, who has the rights over her handmaids and wants to give you one of them so that they might have a child by you and you might have an heir, that is perfectly fine. And so again, what is Abram doing? He has left his father's religion of idolatry, but he has not quite left the customs that he is familiar with, and this just seems right to him. Now, would you agree that that is an okay thing? You say, oh, no, surrogacy is practiced these days, but not quite like that. I don't think that that's what God had in mind, but it seems right to them. He believed whenever he left Ur of the Chaldees, he has grown to being a warrior of righteousness, but he is confusing the customs of the land with what God has done and what God's plan is. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we could step back and say, but God hasn't told him everything yet. God hasn't revealed how this is all supposed to play out. God is allowing him to kind of be in the dark. God is not confusing him, but He's not being overwhelmingly enlightening with him either. And I think, again, of as parents, and you wait to tell your child until it's time for them to know, and it is a process where Abram struggles. Is struggling, is falling, is failing, are bumps and bruises necessary for growth. Count it all joy, my brothers, whenever you fall into diverse temptation, knowing that the trying of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its work so that you might be complete and perfect and lacking in nothing, James says in James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. It's a part of growing up. On the go and on the grow requires development. I'm just going to leave right now the Hagar and Sarai situation because I want to get into the covenant that God makes with Abram. Because Abram asked God again, well, how can I be sure? How can I be certain that what you are saying you're going to deliver upon? And God makes a covenant, and it's kind of like signing on the dotted line. God says, get me 3 animals, big ones. I want you to get me a 3-year-old heifer. I want you to get me a 3-year-old female goat. And I want you to get me a 3-year-old ram. And then I want you to take a turtle dove and a pigeon, and I want you to do with this with them, evidently, because this is what Abraham does. He takes the 3-year-old heifer, and he cuts it in half. Same with the 3-year-old goat and the 3-year-old ram, cuts them in half, and then he lays the pieces on either side. And then it says he placed the pigeon and the young dove, but he didn't cut them. And you say, wow, yeah, that's really strange. I guess I could kind of see the idea of sacrifice here, which is what they built altars for. But what is God doing? God is yielding to the custom that Abraham knows. This is the signing on the dotted line during the custom of Abraham's time. This is what 2 kings would do if they made peace with one another. They would take this exact same setup, they would set it up, and in order for that agreement to be made, both men would walk through the pieces of those animals. And in the process, what they were saying is, by blood, I will keep my word. As these animals have all been cut up and divided, so you can do to me if I break my oath. That almost sounds like something out of like The Godfather, doesn't it? I'm going to give them an offer they can't refuse. God yielding to what Abraham understands, because Abraham has insisted on it, I believe, in his immaturity, proof that God is going to do what he said he'll do. Now, here's the interesting part about the custom of this time. Once God gets his hand upon it, Abram never walks between the halves, and God walks twice. Once as a smoking oven, next as a flaming torch. And in effect, what God does as Abram looks on is God says, I will keep my oath on penalty of death, and when you break yours, I will die for you. Did you know that that's what that promise meant? And what God has just said to Abram is, I know how immature you are. I know how fallible you are. And I know if I make you walk between the pieces that you're going to die, and I'm not ready for my child to die. I will die for you. It's interesting that God took a smoking oven and a flaming torch. And then as he reveals to Abraham the timetable that we started off with, 400 years and your descendants will inherit this land, he says, but first they must go into a land of affliction and be tormented, from whence I will bring them out. Well, what is he talking about there? That is Egyptian bondage. This isn't so much for Abram as it is for those patriarchs that come after Abram. For the one prophet that is writing all of this down, Moses writes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And in the process of the Spirit inspiring Moses to write, Moses understands, and looking at what God had said to Abraham in all of the accordance to what he had said, we are 400 years removed from my father Abraham, and it's time for us to enter into the land. And in the process, God has said affliction is necessary. And it could be translated, instead of a smoking oven, because the implication is there, a furnace of affliction will be your lot. But I will lead you, a flaming torch, out of the land when my nation is ready, and they will receive. Do you see the overtures of a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night 400 years prior? And God says, count it all joy, my brethren, when you fall into divers temptation, knowing that the trying of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work so that you might be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Trust me, God is saying. And we find in these verses an immature toddler growing into a righteous warrior, becoming even more enlightened to God's plan as he becomes, not shunning what God has to say is nearly 400 years out. And what we know by implication, 2,000 years away before Christ comes upon the cross. But embracing, and then it's time to change his name. But he still doesn't have a son. He still doesn't have an heir. But now God says, and this is getting a little bit into next week's lesson, that your name is going to be Father of a multitude. Abraham you shall be called, and Sarai no longer my princess, but the princess. And God is basically making Abram and Sarai the couple of faithful people, the father and mother, if you will, of the faithful. And it only took 10 years to get there. Does God work on you and me? Aren't you glad that he does? But spiritually speaking, I must not only be on the go. In other words, I have to obey those commands that I understand. I obey them and I walk with God to the best of my ability. But I also must be on the grow. I must be expecting for even more revelation from God, from his word, of those things, those deeper things for me to understand, even stricter commands for me to obey, even subjugating me, my family, my community, my country to my Father who is in heaven. But we must be not only on the go, but on the grow. If you have any need this morning, if you have yet to enter into a right relationship with God, we are all children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ, Galatians chapter 3, verses 26 and 27. If you have yet to do that, or if you've wandered away, please come as we stand and as we sing.